I think a lot of people are being turned off by mainstream news. How corporate it's become, how predictable it is, and how elitist it is as well. These are people who are in DC and New York and live in their bubble and have no idea what it's like for the rest of the populations. They are partisan, but they pretend that they're not. Like, no one is under any misunderstanding that Daily Wire is a conservative outlet. But when you turn on CNN, we're straight news. But are you? Is that really true?
Hello and welcome to CultureScape, the show that interviews the geek creators and influencers that built nerd culture. I'm your host, Peter Pischke, and today we're diving deep into the heart of societal discourse with independent journalist Adam B. Coleman. Adam is the founder of Wrong Speak Publishing. He's also a columnist for Human Events and a writer for publications like the New York Post and the Daily Mail. He's also got a fabulous Substack at Speaking Wrong at the Right Time. No one doubts today that in the Western world, we have many problems on hand. But what is so interesting about these problems is if you look under the hood, many of them seem to share the same root cause. Our guest Adam wrote a book, Black Victim to Black Victor, which along with his Substack succinctly describes the problems of what happens when you do not have a father around. So today we'll explore, Adam, this culture of fatherlessness and dissect the pitiful state of our news media. This is going to be a fun conversation I hope challenges some people's perspectives and might enlighten some others. So without further ado, here is Mr. Adam B. Coleman.
Thank you for having me. I appreciate it.
You're awesome to come in. You in the world of journalism freelancing and this kind of like partly in conservative media, partly in mainstream media. You're a bigger fish than me. You're better at this game. So, and I like your work. I like reading your Substack. I think you talk about especially issues when it comes to dealing with families and how that impacted you, how that even impacts your relationship with your own family. I know that you have a kid. I think that's well described, and it goes really well to the heart of that issue. And I think it gels with me. It just gels with me a little bit more than other people who are writing about, but maybe they don't have that personal connection. So I appreciate you taking the time to come on the show today.
Yeah, it's absolutely a pleasure.
So let's back this up. Tell us a little bit about yourself, Adam. How did you find yourself working in journalism and speaking about these topics?
Purely by accident. A little bit by accident. The first thing I did was I wrote my book. I started writing my book a few months after the death of George Floyd. It was one of those things where I felt like I had to do something. And I had this concept of writing a book probably a year prior. The theme was like questioning things. And I think I sat down for like 1 hour and tried to write something, couldn't come up with anything and abandoned it. But when this happened, I remember just watching like Culture War podcasts and things like that, and just thinking to myself, like, I should do something. I don't know what it is, but I should do something. And I think a lot of it stemmed also from feeling like I couldn't say how I felt. And I didn't really use social media. I wasn't on Twitter. I didn't do any of that stuff. I barely had a Facebook account that I used. I just kept it to myself. I had my personal politics, just kept it to myself. And I chose not to say anything, but it was like when someone says you're not allowed to, then it's a different feeling. And what I started doing was seeking out like free speech forums, and then basically just trying to figure out, am I the only one that feels this way? Am I going crazy? And to hear from other people like, no, you're not crazy. We feel this way too. And I actually got encouragement from them to write more because of how I explained everything that I was saying. And so from there, I was like, you know what, maybe they're onto something. So it was kind of like all of those things. 2020 was a very emotional time for a lot of people, and it was confusing. And I think it was like all those things kind of put together. And then one day I said, you know what, I'm going to write a book. And I sat down basically 5 days a week. I think there were 2 weeks that I didn't write anything. It was like 5 days a week for about an hour to hour and a half. I just wrote. And it took me about 8 months to completion. I self-published it. And then from there, all I was really trying to do was just market the book. I had zero expectations. I didn't know if anybody was going to buy it, if anybody was going to like it, and I was okay with that. It was more so for me to put it out there. I felt good putting it out there. And so because I had such low expectations, everything else has been like a complete blessing that, people tell me not just that they like the book, but like one particular person in mind said that book changed their life. And that's like it's hard to fathom that, but I understand what he means. Um, the way I wrote it was very much so in a good faith way. And even if you didn't necessarily agree with me, you understood where I was coming from. And so it makes you kind of question some things, right? It doesn't force you to question, but just hearing me out makes you kind of think about some things in a little bit of a different way. But that's something that I still think about when he said that. And so many other people told me how much it impacted their lives by reading this book, whether it's the aspects of victimhood, whether it's the aspects of fatherlessness. There's so much to it. Like even though it's called Black Victim and Black Victor, that's just a case study. Like you can swap out Black and put just about anything else in there. There's some things that are specific to Black in the book, but there are a lot of things that aren't. And it's very relatable because of that.
Yeah, when I read your stuff, obviously there's some stuff where you're talking about culturally that relates to the Black American experience for sure. But maybe for those that haven't written or paid attention to the issue, but the way you describe the problems that are facing so many people, that's true of so many Americans. I would say perhaps even the majority of middle class or lower class Americans of any color. There's a huge amount of fatherlessness and broken families in the white communities as well as the Black. And I never get the sense when I'm reading you that this only applies to them. Your writing is very welcoming and it's very clear. And it's a heartbreaking issue. One of the things that stood out, I think, among the story what I've read is you talk about how growing up without having a father around and having all those effects affected you, even when you later became a father yourself, and you kind of unwittingly, some of the stuff carried on, even though you didn't mean to. And just speaking for myself, I grew up in a single parent household. I can relate to that completely. It's like these weird tics or something that carried on with you. You don't mean for it to happen, but it just sticks to you. And I just think your writing on this topic is so excellent.
Thank you. And that's exactly it. I try to talk about how, like, when I think there's a difference between talking about a problem and complaining about it. And so when I talk about like my struggles, it's not me complaining. It's me talking about it because I overcame it. And so my goal is to say, I went through this. I'm no longer going through that. And so if I can overcome that obstacle, so can you. So when I talk about my anxiety that I used to have, my depression, my feeling of worthlessness, my struggles with women, like all these different things, these are things that I was able to overcome. It took me time. And it took a belief that I was able to do so. But I talk about it not to complain, but to say, like, it's relatable because a lot of people are going through it. They just don't talk about it publicly. And I kind of feel like if you talk about it, it doesn't harm you anymore, right? It can't be used against you. It's like, it's kind of like when someone has a scandal. The reason there's a scandal is because they were trying to hide it. But when they address it, it's not really that big of a scandal, right? So you can't weaponize something, most of the time, you can't weaponize something that you embrace and you talk about openly. It's no longer a weapon against you because you're not scared of it. You're not fearful of other people finding out about it. You're talking about it. So, I think that's one of my approaches is to be very open about very specific things, even though I'm kind of a private person. So I talk about very particular things because I'm personally okay with talking about it because it doesn't bother me to talk about it because I've already worked through all of that stuff. But I'm also private. I don't overshare. on many things. So I try to find that balance between the two.
I'm an introvert by nature, but I way overshare. And I could blame that on fatherlessness, but that's probably not true. I think I would be like that, parent or no parent. That's just kind of who I am. It's interesting to me. It's so weird because it's like, this is obviously like a huge topic that affects us. I just think of the internet today, how much of the animosity we feel comes from people who came from homes where they didn't have better behavior modeled, whether you're talking about all the ladies that are on OnlyFans, all the weebs stuck on 4chan, how much of the stuff that happens with the alt-right. There's so many things, even terrible, horrible things like mass shooters. It's like you can see that there is damage being done to so many people. But for whatever reason, especially when you're talking about young men, talking about fatherlessness, I'm not going to say it's taboo, but it's very unpopular. It's hard on both sides of the aisle in different ways to talk about. I don't know. I never quite understood why that was, because like for me, I could recognize that's a very big issue in my life, but for some reason, it's like no one wants to hear that message. But maybe that's because we're all guilty. So like no one wants to hear how they're actually part of the problem. But what are your thoughts of that?
Well, the reason why talking about fatherlessness is taboo is because it gets interpreted as it's the woman's fault that the father isn't there, or somehow it's the woman's fault for not raising the child properly, even though the father wasn't there. And I think that's kind of the hesitation to talk about it, because we don't want to appear like we're insulting our mothers. But at the same time, we have to be honest about the choices that some of our mothers make. And typically when I talk about single mothers, I'm not talking about divorcees. I'm talking about children who were made out of wedlock, mother never married the father, and so on and so on. I usually am not referring to divorcees and widows, but that's just me. Some people just kind of throw them all in there. Although I do think that divorce is a big problem. My big thing is, at least they tried. At the very least, they tried to have some sort of sustainable relationship. But like, I've talked about my situation. My father was married. He was always married to somebody else, though. We were the other kids. We were the other family. And she had 2 kids by him. There was no possibility that my father was ever going to leave his wife to be with my mother. Doesn't seem like he had any interest in doing so. And so, these were choices that my mother made. When I was born, my mother was 24 and my father was 50, right? So, there's a huge age difference. And I understand my mother's situation as well, because she didn't have the best of situation. I don't talk about her upbringing because that's her story. But it's like I understand the circumstance that led to it, but at the same time, she was an adult when both myself and my sister were born. And so these were the choices that she made. She always knew he was a married man, and that didn't bother her. And her choices led for my life to be this particular way and my sister's life to be in this particular way. And we were negatively impacted by it. Does she regret it? I don't know. But, I think honesty with love is what's needed, rather than like fear of offending, but never getting to the truth.
Yeah, and I completely understand the desire. With my own parents, I don't want to throw anyone under the bus. I'm not, I don't want to embarrass, even when I talk about this issue or mention on social media, there's still, a little bit of concern. It's like, you don't want to hurt these people that you love and that sacrifice so much, to make you being here even possible. But on the other hand, the bad choices they have made, those last. And unfortunately, so often with domestic abuse, divorce situations, it's the children that suffer. And it's hard, it's really hard to cross that gap, to thread that needle. So you make a good point there. But on the other hand, it's like, this is such a big issue for so many people. Um, I honestly, I wonder how much of our culture war stuff is rooted in that we do have bigger problems going on, but don't want to deal with those. So instead, we're going to all complain about Star Wars or Taylor Swift this week.
Well, actually, so I'll tell you this. I have a book that I'm supposed to be working on. Um, but the primary objective of it is to talk about fatherlessness. I'm trying to do an apolitical fatherlessness book, and how it impacts our society. And you can name every major issue that's happening, major thing that we talk about. You can range it from homelessness, drug addiction, relationship issues, and I can show you a very easy link to family dysfunction and fatherlessness. So even when we talk about relationships, part of the reason why feminism works for certain demographics of women is that the first man that they're supposed to be in love with is their father, and that first man disappointed them. So how is any man going to do anything better than him? It really comes down to that. You have an ideology that says all men are bad, all men are disappointing, and leans on negativity of men. And so then it's very easy to look at their father. My father ain't shit. Hey, you know what? Maybe my father is an example of what men are really like. And they're always ready for a man to disappoint them, a man to hurt them emotionally, a man to just, to let them down some way. On the flip side, I think a lot of the manosphere situation is similar. I think there are a lot of young men who grew up in single parent homes, who grew up with their mothers, and they were neglected in some way by their mother. They weren't shown certain things because their mother isn't supposed to be the one to show them that. They were treated differently. They didn't have a male figure to show them how to do these particular things. And I completely understand that. Much of the manosphere, when I started following it, it made sense to me what was going on. Not the sensational stuff, right? But some of the advice that they were giving and the perspectives they were giving actually wasn't that bad. And I started implementing it in my life. And actually, when my wife and I, when we were dating, we would watch some of the content and we would talk about it and we engage in conversation surrounding it. And my life started improving actually because of some of the content within the manosphere. And now it's become ridiculous and it's just all entertainment. But there was a point in time when it was good, solid advice. And I realized that some of that advice would be advice you would get from your father. And that's why it really resonates with a lot of men, is because they never got that advice from their fathers. They never got that advice from any man. I grew up, I wasn't around men at all. I know people who didn't have their father around, but they had an uncle or they had a grandfather. They had some sort of male figure that gave them some sort of direction. I had none. And so figuring out what it was to be a man it was a very difficult thing for me to accomplish. It took me a long time, but the manosphere content actually helped me in some ways. But I think I'm really good at saying that's entertainment. This is useful, and I do that all the time.
Yeah, a lot of people aren't very good with parasocial relationships, especially these days. No,
Yeah.
you are right. I think if you think kind of like basic Jordan Peterson level kind of advice, like, make your bed, tie your shoes, be on time, be orderly, meet your bills when you get them, like very basic life advice. But it's sad, people don't like to talk about, but it's sad, but very basic life advice is very important. And for many people, it's very hard. It's hard for them to get that in their lives. And while it seems like, well, that's so obvious, well, of course, why didn't they hear that? But that often is the problem. It's like, they didn't hear the basics. They really don't understand that, no, you shouldn't, you're 19. Why are you putting $20,000 on a credit card? That's stupid. Don't do that.
Right.
But they don't have that. They don't have someone to help provide the guidance and discipline. It's like, how do you find your first job? What's the difference between a job and a career? When you're looking for your significant other, what are the kind of qualities you're looking for? Like, so many things. That's so important. And moms are great and they could do a lot, but dads are great too. and they have an important role. And unfortunately, for whatever reason, Western society has tried to just kind of pull them out of the picture to, for many people, terrible, terrible results.
Yeah. No, you're absolutely right. And as far as the advice goes, I'll tell you this. Um, my son is now 18, and I remember when he was very small, they were like, "Oh, I like the cute baby phase." For me, it was fine. Cute baby's phase is fine. But for me, I was always waiting for him to be old enough for me to give him the shortcuts, right? Because I never got that. And so like when people are like, "Oh, the teenage years," I was like, I'm looking forward to the teenage years, you know, where he has his first girlfriend, he has his first disappointment, and we can talk about it. And when he's attempting to do something and he's feeling down about it, and I'm there to say, "You got this." Like all the things I didn't get as a kid, I was now able to give him and have him put it into practice and have him make mistakes and have him do better and set expectations for him and stay on him because I know he can do better. And so now, like, he's even chiller than I am. Hey, he's a great, responsible kid. He has a job. He's trying to secure his future. He's trying to figure himself out. And he knows that he has me as emotional support. And he can talk to me about anything. And I won't judge him, and we'll just have a conversation. The only thing I ever told him is do not lie to me. And other than that, like if you messed up, just talk to me about it and we'll figure it out. But don't lie to me. And from there, we've had a really good relationship because of it.
Do you think there's like a way for society to self-correct? I obviously, perhaps the only way through this, and maybe this is true for most issues, is just at the individual level and for people to make better decisions. But is there a way to help society to correct? I mean, feminism, it does have a lot of positives, but a big negative was the decision that I need a man like a fish needs a bicycle.
Yeah,
That was a terrible idea. It is kind of a funny a little quote, but it's not good. Like half the population are male. Like you're just saying, oh, we don't need that half. It's not a good idea. But that's what they decided they were going to go with. Our good feminists from the '60s, and this is kind of where it's left us, unfortunately.
Do I think that society can self-correct? Yes, because I think people can change. I think that there would have to be a multitude of things that would have to occur. I'm one of those people that thinks that, because it's true, you can find success out of failure. So while a lot of people are afraid that our society is in the decline and are afraid that our society is falling apart and dying, and I get it, sometimes you need that rock bottom to come back from and realize we went too far. We need to self-correct. I think sometimes, especially with us being in the information age, a lot of Gen Z are looking at their parents and saying, "I don't want to do that. Like my parents are crazy," or look, they have a lot of information in front of them and access to a lot of different perspectives. Whereas when I was a kid, you had the encyclopedia, right? That was basically it, and the people you knew. And so now you can challenge ideas. You can challenge orthodoxy. You can say like, yeah, my parents have a point, but like, are they full of shit about this other stuff? Like you are now able to self-correct if things aren't working in your direction. But I think what we need a couple of things. We need a restoration in humility, and we need to bring back shame. I think social shame is a really big driving force in any society, right? There are certain things that are shameful and you do not do, and it is not tolerated. So like, if you do anything remotely pedophilic, that brings disgust to 99.9% of the population, right? So that is a social shame that we still have that is good. There needs to be a social shame, maybe not as strong, for pedophilia, but there needs to be a certain level of shame when it comes to certain activities. We used to have a certain social shame about teenage pregnancy, and it made people fearful of having sex too soon before getting married and shaming their family. You don't see that anymore. You don't hear people saying, "I'm going to shame my family. It's going to ruin our reputation as a family." And I don't think there's anything necessarily wrong with that. I think it's very considerate to think about how this will make yourself and others look because of your own behavior. Um, it doesn't mean that all shame is good. It doesn't mean that all, I'm not trying to romanticize the past, but I think that there is something there about a social stigma that is necessary to have, because what ends up happening is we lose those things, and then everybody looks to the government to somehow supplement it. Oh, we just need a law that allows this or restricts this. Yeah, but that's not how you fix social issues. That's not how you fix society, right? The laws are like the last measure, right? Well, how do we conduct ourselves as people? How do we conduct ourselves as men, women, parents, children? How do we conduct ourselves? And do we get to hold each other accountable? But it just seems like there's less neighborhoods. We're not close to our extended family. There's more separation. People move across the country, in a split second. As soon as you're 18, you're supposed to be out of the house. There's a lot more disconnection and less likely to hold people accountable. If you decided to leave your house at 18 and do something that your parents don't like, you're like, well, F you, I'm not talking to you. And nobody would care, because it's your life. You do whatever you want to do. And that's the kind of society that we have. You're now allowed to do that. And there's no shame if you do that. And people just say, well, they just kind of shrug their shoulders,
Yeah, no, that's interesting. I think it's interesting that so much, obviously this is more a point from the left-wing point of view, but that the term they like to use is destigmatization. And it often feels like destigmatization is really, they're saying, take away the punishments, take away the negative consequences. And I'm like, to a point, yeah, we should be rubbing people's faces in it. We, obviously terrible things happen. A lot of things are outside of control. On the other hand, some things definitely do need to have consequences, and we do need to have red lines. It'd be like, no, that's too far. That is obviously immorally unacceptable and is not good for people. And pretending otherwise is not gonna help. So many things I feel like we want to pretend it's okay. It's like, what we're seeing in Canada right now with how they've expanded euthanasia with the disabled is horrific. And what language they use up there is this language. They say destigmatize it. Well, I think people should feel ashamed if they push their 12-year-old kid who's a paraplegic into committing suicide. That's really bad. That's bad. Don't do that. So to your point, I do agree. We need to. It's hard to put the right words for it, but at least the terms we're using here, shame, stigma. You need some of that, because it's like, how else can you help people understand, especially people who don't have a strong family network, who don't have people who are going to help role model positive behavior. But I mean, this is just me guessing. I mean, this is just me, shooting the wind. I have no idea how to fix any of these problems. I just know it's a big problem, and I see it all the time. It makes me sad. I have law friends all across the place. And a lot of my friends, especially who might identify like they're alt-right, they're into 4chan, some of that kind of gamer culture. Like the number of them that actually have a positive male role model in their life, I mean, you could probably count on one hand. Like that, like the number of, I'd be surprised if even 10% of the people who are frequenting places like 4chan, who might be listening to someone like Nick Fuentes, like how many of them actually had a dad around? I would be willing to put money down that it's got to be, a quarter or less. I mean, that's how prolific I think this problem is. But it's like, you're not allowed to talk about it. And like you said, maybe it's because we don't want to hurt the moms, but it hurts people, because it's like having a dad is really important. And me personally, I didn't really understand until I was becoming an adult. And you kind of feel like where something was missing. It was like, well, some people seem to they had this thing, and you can kind of feel it out. You're like, oh, that's where dad was supposed to be. and it hurts you. It hurts you, and it makes me sad. I had lost the opportunity, and I just think like, look, humans are built a certain way. Geese made for life. Animals behave a certain way. People need whole families. They need a mom and a dad. And pretending otherwise, as much as we would like it to be different in reality, like it would be nice if you just slot in one parent and it's just as good as two. Unfortunately, that's not how humans are built, and we're only hurting ourselves pretending it's something else. But yeah, that's my little rant.
No, I completely agree with you. And actually, I want to kind of go back because we were talking about feminism. I think it's not just feminism. Any ideology that's like this, any ideology that believes in order to find success, you must take away from something else, to me is a failed ideology.
Yeah,
It's ultimately
100%.
going to be detrimental. So whether it's red pill guys saying that we need to take away from women because they have too much power in order for men to succeed, well, that's not actually true. You can find success otherwise. Um, you know, if you're asking for equality, if you're asking for fairness, that's one thing. But I think that when you start going into the language of we need to force, we need to take away, and then demonizing language about a particular demographic, there are pro-Black people that believe that white people have too much stuff and that we need to take away their stuff so we can have it. Or if they don't have stuff, it's because white people took it from them. It's always in the external that someone is doing something to us. And that's why I talk about like the victim mindset, victim mentality. Everything about victimhood is the external, right? And when you start to look at the internal, what you have control over, what you can do, then you're no longer a victim, right? So even if this person is doing something negative, well, you still have the power to do something about your life, even in that circumstance where that person's doing something negative. And I think that it's a switch in view that I think we need more of, the victim mindset versus victor mindset.
I agree, but it's tough. Even with the disability stuff, everything else, it's so easy to fall into the grievances, the thinking of grievances. Oh, woe is me. All this stuff happened to me, and look, often people are right. Like often those grievances are very real. Problem is just living and wallowing in them isn't going to fix anything. It's not going to make your life any better. You're not going to be any happier or well off. It's like, you can't let it swallow you up. But for so many people, that's what happens. And we live in a culture at the moment that encourages it, that praises it. I think that's a good thing. That's wonderful. You're a victim. That's great. But it's like, this is just my problem with people so often. It's like they meet someone who's suffering and they just want to talk about, oh, how wonderful. Look, you're going through this terrible thing. And then that's just it. And it's like, is this actually a caring society? Well, congrats. You recognize they did this. You recognize the person's drowning over there. Did you do anything to save them? No. Okay, then shut up.
Yeah. And you made a good point, because I was actually about to say that it's the enablers. The enablers are allowing for this to flourish. So like, I remember, by the way, how old are you, if you don't mind me asking?
34. Yeah.
34. Okay.
Growing a little closer to death every day.
Well, I'm 39. So you might remember this. So you remember Austin Powers in Fat Bastard, the character?
Yes. Austin Powers 2, I think. Yeah.
Yeah, I believe it's that. Yeah. So I remember, and I think this was the first time when I saw like people actually like caring. I remember when there were fat people who were upset because Fat Bastard was a character, and they were saying the very things that like of fat positivity and stuff like that. But this was like the early incarnation. And I thought to myself, like, one, it's a fictional character. Two, it's a comedy. Like they make fun of all types of people. When they make fun of Swedish, you don't see the Swedes getting pissed off and saying boycott the movie. Like, so there was something about that. I just remember thinking like, that's weird that people are actually like taking this seriously. And I remember just like the change in language. what you're not allowed to say, what you shouldn't say. Well, it could be considered, insensitive, and people just slowly kind of giving way on it. And now we're at full bore. If you don't date a fat person, you're fat phobic.
Yeah.
It's just like it's completely ridiculous. But it's that repetition of just like chiseling away at our good nature, and having the most sensitive person win each and every time. And sometimes if you give into the most sensitive person, well, everybody becomes sensitive and everyone becomes weaker. Whereas maybe we should strengthen the resolve of the sensitive person.
Yeah, it's like, there's so many of the forbidden topics, like the issue with men invading women's sports. We just had this golfer, right? And they say he's begun the transition. He came to the golf. He came to the golf tournament. He's wearing pink. Okay, apparently that's all you need to do now. And it's obvious this person is the 99.9% of this person's lifetime, he was a guy, and he has all the benefits. And now he's showing up this golf tournament for women, and it just so happens in such a way that it might benefit him. He just creams everyone, just breaks through, breaks huge records. It's like one, you're not allowed to notice it, right? Because the noticing it, apparently, for a lot of people, that's enough. That will make you a bad person if you just observe it.
Yeah.
But it's like, I know a lot of people who are trans. I have friends that are trans. They're actually very cool people. They are nothing like this. And it's like the people that supposedly that we're being sensitive for to help, they aren't actually being helped. I know this with disability activism. In so many ways, one of the sad things that I think I've seen over the last 10 years. I'm only 34, so I haven't been doing this decades of disability reporting. But it is the sense you get that the problems people have in the disability community are stacking up, and it feels like there's so much voice and talk about it, but very little work is actually being to be had. And I'm just taking a guess here, and I think that's true of a lot of other issues. And I would bet it's true for the LGBT stuff. I would even bet it's true for Black Americans, because it just feels like everyone wants to get a pat on the back for being the hero, but no one wants to lift a finger. But maybe I'm just being a pessimist. Maybe I'm just too pessimistic because I'm a misanthrope and a hermit.
Well, I don't think you're wrong. I think a lot of people like getting credit for doing nothing. It kind of reminds me of people who call themselves activists but never leave their house. It's just like, how are you an activist? Well, on Twitter, I say this is bad. That's it. That's a really low bar. And I think a lot of people like the easy street when it comes to doing stuff, but it's like that in politics too. They just think that, well, if we just elect this person, they'll fix everything. It's like, it takes 10 minutes to go and vote. So you think just doing that will put somebody in there and they'll just fix everything. I don't care what party it is. They're not going to fix everything. That's ridiculous. And they're not going to fix your problems either. So maybe you should do the hard work and fix your problems. And I'll say this on a personal note. A lot of the things that I was able to overcome took a long time, and it took a repetition. It took failing. It took realizing I'm messing up on this. It took trying again. It's a really long, arduous process, but it's necessary to go through if you actually want to improve your life. And I see people who are very nihilistic that process will lead to them actually changing their life. And you were talking about the 4chan and those type of guys. Nihilism is that's like their blood. It just runs through their
pervasive.
Veins. And they're like, why bother? What does it matter? Society's dying. Everything's bad. And it was just like, that person is never going to be happy, because there will always be problems. There will never be a time where humans don't have problems, right? And once you understand that premise, then it's about, all right, well, can we have less problems? Sure, we can have less problems, or we can have different problems, right? So the problems of today are different than the problems of 100 years ago. And some of the things that we would call a problem today, maybe 100 years ago, they'd be like, I'd love that problem. Like, I don't know. It's
Too,
just,
too much food. Too much food is exactly that.
yes, too much food, exactly. Famine or gluttony. I don't know which one's better. So it's just, but I think that, there will always be problems. And just because a problem exists, and this is why like places like Twitter, or even I've never really been on 4chan, but I'm, familiar with it to a degree. There are just endless cycles of like reinforcing everything is wrong. And you can choose who to follow, and then that person profits off of you believing that everything is wrong. And the amount of good stuff that you see happening, especially like if you follow like cultural and political stuff, is like 1%. Like it's just everything is crumbling, especially on the political right. Everything is falling apart. Everything is crumbling.
This is an excellent transition. Thank you for making it. A big reason I wanted to start doing this show, CultureScape, is because like I love culture. I love nerd culture. I love learning about how it came to be. All these amazing writers, all these people who worked on this. How it took time to build these institutions, to develop these ideas. It's like it's so easy to complain, and anyone can do it. You don't need any knowledge whatsoever. It's like culture actually is amazing, and it's worth cherishing and promoting, and we're just not going to get anywhere if we're just complaining all the time.
Right.
And I see it so often, and this is the other kind of thing that I want to talk with you today in this interview was, working in media, news media, and it feels especially for the right that it used to be it was more to the left, but now both sides are doing it. They are stuck in this complain mode. And there's very little cherishing of culture, of what they have. And it is a travesty. But then again, I look at the numbers, this is no offense to the people at, I'm just using them as an example. A lot of people do this. So like the people at Timcast, it's like if a story comes out, you can almost guarantee every time what angle they're going to take. It's going to be slightly ridiculous. It's going to be very negative. It's like, are they right sometimes? Yeah. But is it very constructive? Not really. But that could be an economics thing. Like the economics right now for making money in news is so tight. So I don't know. What are your feelings about the state of news media? Where are we headed? Because it is kind of a very rocky time to try to work in news.
Well, I guess it depends which sector of news. So if you're talking about mainstream or if you're talking about independent, I think they're on two different trajectories. They intersect in some ways. So we'll go into both. So like on the mainstream part, I think a lot of people are being turned off by mainstream news. I think they're being turned off by how corporate it's become, how predictable it is, and how elitist it is as well. And I think my biggest issue, I got two big issues actually. My two big issues with mainstream media is that one, it is very much so elitist. It is very much so ivory tower. These are people who are in DC and New York and live in their bubble and have no idea what it's like for the rest of the population, right? These are the people who say flyover state, right? These are these type of people. They're the coastal elites. They're the ones who are in charge. They're the ones who are the figureheads of these media institutions. And they have a lot of money and they have a lot of corporate backing, especially from Big Pharma. So like that's one of my biggest issues. The second issue I have is that, yes, they are partisan, but they pretend that they're not. And personally, if you're partisan, just say that you are. Like no one is under any misunderstanding that Daily Wire is a conservative outlet. We get it. It's a conservative outlet. So you understand when you're going to this conservative outlet, they're giving you a conservative perspective. But when you turn on CNN, we're straight news. But are you? Is that really true? And it's that dishonesty. And it's one thing if you have a lean, It's another thing if you fall over, right? And they completely fallen over into one particular side, one particular perspective. MSNBC pretends to do the same thing, and and they're even more overt in how they lean. You already know if you get somebody from this side that comes onto their show, they're either going to treat them like with kid gloves and they're wonderful, or they're going to cut them off and go at them and go at them and go at them. It is very overt. It's very obvious, and a lot of people don't like it. Now, when it comes to independent media, I see promise, but I also see some of the same mistakes that they're making that following the footsteps of the mainstream media. So, for example, going after sensational content because it does get clicks, right? And that's the same stuff. Like, there's a reason why, like CNN would have an article that says white supremacy, black police, right? Because they use keywords, and they're catching all the keywords, and they're trying to get as many clicks. There's a reason why they have ridiculous headlines, because it pisses people off or the people love it, right? And it makes them want to click on it. I'm seeing some of the same issues when it comes to independent media sites going towards sensational content, going towards only trans stuff, right? You know, just like it's that kind of thing when we have the opportunity to do the thing that that is the opposite of what we hate. And instead, we're doing the thing that we hate because that's the only way that we feel that we can sustain ourselves. And I don't think that is necessarily true. I personally think it's a shortcut. And just like most shortcuts, it doesn't last long. I think that good quality stuff takes time and it takes effort and it takes resiliency. It's much, like, for example, it's much easier to sell drugs and make a few $1,000s real fast, right? But the consequences, you go to jail, you can die, you have all these big issues.
Yeah.
It's much harder to get an education, work your way up the ladder, and then come out in the long run way ahead if you had ever sold drugs. And I see a lot of people selling drugs in media. You know, they're just trying to get the quick hit. Story. They just want to report on it right away. They don't fact check stuff. They just they just put stuff out there. And I think that is the state of our media.
I agree with most of that, especially the stuff on independent media. I have the same worries about where the problem is so much is, like, you're right. It's like, it's just the way that everything is structured now if you want to be profitable. And so news is basically all of news, and then conservative news especially is kind of leading the way, but all of news is doing this. They're all going this direction, whether they're doing it fast or slow, they're all heading towards this direction, where news and being an influencer is basically the same thing.
Yeah.
And so all news people now have to be like little celebrities, and everyone has to play the influencer game. The problem is the dynamics of being a responsible and moral news person and being a popular influencer are different. Right. Are they huge differences? No, but just like if you are flying or you're sailing a boat, little differences over a long time do make a big difference. But they don't have it. You know, this has been a long problem for conservative media even before independent media started going strong. It's hard to make these arguments because they feel like they're constantly under attack. But I'm with you, because I'm like, is this actually being helpful? And are we actually are people in independent media? I'm an independent journalist, so I guess maybe I concern myself, but it's like, are we persuading new people to this? Are we persuading more people, or are we pushing people away by just double downing with the audience we already have? And there's not really a good conversation around this. And look, it's hard. I get it. No one wants to say, well, Emily, we're going to have to let you go because we want to be a little less clickable. Like, no one can make that no one could say that, like, in a business meeting. Like, how could you? You sound like a terrible person. But in a weird way, to be responsible news, that is kind of what you have to do sometimes. But no one wants to say that. And I will, before I flip back over to you, what you said about mainstream media, I think largely that's true. I think there are aspects of media that are survived from professional journalism that are useful, and they aren't the people at like the top of CNN or New York Times or Washington Post. No, they're the reporters who just keeping their heads down and just doing the day to day. And those are the people I feel really bad for. But that system over there is a wreck. Also, it's just for slightly different reasons. As you can tell today, I'm very pessimistic. Not a lot of hope on the horizon in Peter's world, apparently.
Well, and to add to what you were talking about, the journalists who do the groundwork, the issue is that they have editors. And see, the editors are the ones who not only tell you that Trump went to China to visit the president and sign some deal, but they also want to let you know that he's involved in a scandal and accusations of impropriety, and he's been divorced, all in that same article, right? Make sure you put that in there too, right? So what's happening is even the factual stuff like when, where, how, and why is getting interrupted with a little bit of narrative. Let's just add that 2 cents into there, right? Even though it's true, right? Even though those things are true, well, some of them are true to a degree.
Some of them, yeah, some.
Yeah, some of them. When they were like accused of impropriety, accused by who? It's like when I remember Fox News used to say, some people say, it was like, who's some people? It's that kind of vague, statement. It's when that kind of stuff happens, that's when it's like, can you trust the source? And a lot of it has to do with the editors. So you were asking me before, like behind the scenes, getting into, I don't know if you want to go more into that route. Like
no, go ahead.
Journalism.
Go ahead. I think the business of journalism is fascinating, and I think it plays so much a bigger role in what you see in the media than most people seem to realize. Happy journalists put out less garbage, in my experience. And that's why, by the way, I think letting all these companies going under, I don't think, at least the short term, is going to lead to better news. But that's just my my prediction. So yeah, no, shoot, I'd love to hear it, Adam.
Yeah, no, I agree with you as well. One thing I'll try to focus on is that a lot of news, I don't know if you've noticed this, but a lot of news is reporting on someone else in the news and what they said. And so what the news person said is now the news of the day. It was like, wait, so news is reporting on news to make that the news. Like it's weird. And there's a lot of that. So let's say, for example, and here's the thing, that's kind of like what you have to do. So Tiffany Justice with Moms for Liberty was just on Joanne Reed's show. I'm going to be working on an article talking about that appearance, but that's a media appearance, right? And Joanne Reed is supposed to be a journalist, supposedly. And so
at one point in time, point in time,
it's a very weird, shaky area. And I'm giving my opinion on what we saw there from it, and so I'm actually doing the very thing that I'm kind of complaining about, but I think it just happens a little bit too much. Not necessarily that we shouldn't do it. I think we should call out members of the media who act in a particular way. And I think that interview was disgusting. To me, it doesn't even matter if you agreed with Tiffany Justice or not. I think allowing someone to come onto your show that, yes, okay, you don't agree with them, but when you ask them a question, allow them to speak in completion, and then you move forward. The problem is that television doesn't allow for that. There's such time constraints with television. I can't tell you, like, when you do a TV appearance, they're like, you have 3 minutes.
Oh, dude, I know exactly. I was on the Armstrong show last year, and it was like, I was like, oh, we're going to cover this and this. It was like this really long chart. It's like, okay, I was really excited because I was like, okay, they're going to let me talk. And I get on there, and I swear it was 90 seconds. And like the first 45 minutes, my equipment didn't work. So it's like, and now we have Peter Pischke. I was like, can you hear me? Can you hear me? Can you hear me? Thank you, Peter. So no, I know exactly.
Yeah,
I know exactly what you're talking about. It's crazy. The margins are so tight in TV. It's just nuts.
yeah, it's absolutely crazy. Um, but and another thing that is interesting about getting into media is I'll speak from my perspective. It's really cool to get into media to be a voice for people who aren't given a voice. And so a lot of people, in my opinion, a lot of people who are in media want to just talk about themselves, want to just show how great they are. Look, I have the best points. There's a that kind of ego about it, and this is bipartisan. And while some guy who's a working class Joe who's reading might read it and say like I agree with them, he doesn't connect with them, right? And I think that there are people who overtalk and over intellectualize, and they don't speak in a way to actually make people understand what they're saying. They're not actually communicating with people. They're talking at people. And so I think my objective was always to have good vocabulary, not overly ridiculous vocabulary, understandable, clear points, because I want the audience to understand what I am saying and to speak up for what is wrong, and speak up for regular people. And I think that, like, kind of like the voice of the working class, because like that's really what I am. Um, and I is one of the reasons why I started writing, because I felt like nobody was saying how I felt, and how I feel is how a lot of people feel. Um, you know, and how come I'm not being represented? Well, it's because a lot of the media is filled up with college graduates who went to Ivy League schools or top ranked schools, and they've all been uh, indoctrinated to become this particular way, or let's say they weren't indoctrinated to become leftists. They've all been taught to think that they are smarter than everybody else, to write in a very particular way that shows off their writing talent. And I didn't go to college. I don't have any formal writing training, yet I'm able to do their job and I'm able to do it effectively, and people like it. And it's because I'm not trying to do any of those things. I respect the audience. I respect that people can understand what like a little bit of a complex thing is. I've had editors, and there's no shot at my editors, but I've had editors in the past say like, um, I don't think we should have that term in because people aren't going to understand. And I'm thinking to myself, of course they'll understand this. But they, like, even sometimes they don't think that their audience can understand. Like, you put two words together, like that they might mean something. What one word means. Put the second word, you know what that means. Put them together. Oh, okay, I understand what you're saying. That's
Yeah.
not that difficult. But they don't think that their audience can understand that. So they remove those things. It's like, it's weird. Sometimes it's kind of weird, but I think for me, I'm just really appreciative of the different opportunities I've been given, um, to write for different publications, to not be censored. I write what I want to write, and like, especially like the New York Post, for example, I know the type of stuff that they like, and I'm cool with it, and I write it. And they might ask me to write something, but I will only write it if I agree with whatever point they're saying. And we're on the same page. We have a really good relationship with my editor, Kelly Torrance, at the New York Post, who, by the way, has become a friend. She was just over at my place. We filmed for Breaking Bread, my video series. It'll come out in a couple weeks. But like, we have a really good relationship. And I think that's something that a lot of people don't realize is um, the amount of relationship building that you have to have with editors, and you build a mutual respect. And sometimes you don't gel with an editor, and you're like, I don't know what to send this person because they're hard to please. And then sometimes you do. And I've been very fortunate that Kelly gels with me. Every time she makes an edit, I'm just like, I'm good with it because she knows my voice and she really doesn't edit much of my stuff. If she edits, it's kind of like it's a necessary edit. And she made it better. So that's those type of relationships are really beneficial.
You were speaking about when you're writing you're writing about a news topic, writing in such a way that you understand, but maybe the people who are editing don't. I've had that experience before when especially with like I'm covering the chronic pain stuff. Um, and it's that really cool experience. I'm sure you've had it where you were like your editors and people at the news company, they're not really sure if this will do anything. And then you get it back and it like gets a ton of comments. It gets some real numbers. That's always real. That's super exciting. I
Yeah.
really, that, because it's like, it like tells you like, no, actually you were right. You had your finger on the pulse of the culture and what people are worried about. I had that experience last year when I begot the fourth most popular USA Today column of 2020. The fourth. I'm like that meme of that really excited guy that got third place at the Olympics.
Hey,
So
listen,
I'm very proud of that.
I would be too, man. Like, shoot. As somebody who never really got any sort of accomplishments when he was a kid, I wasn't good at baseball. You know, when you got your name in the paper one time, you're like, my name got in the paper. It could have just been a crappy game, and you were one of the few kids that got a hit. But it was
Yep.
just like my name got in the paper. I'm going to take that as a W. And so, quite literally, every time I write an article for the New York Post, I go and get a paper, and we have a collage, or like a scrapbook of all the articles that I've written, because I don't want to take it for granted. Like, I don't know when my last article will be for the New York Post, and I never thought I would ever write for them. So, I have actually framed on my wall is the very first article that I wrote for the New York Post, because I had no idea if I'd ever write for them again. So I was just kind of like, this is awesome. And I still, to this day, I've been writing for them almost every week, just about every week, for the past year and a half. And I buy a paper every single time. And because I think this goes back to humility, and this goes back to gratitude and being thankful for the things that you have. And like I said, from the very beginning, I had no expectations of any of this stuff, be doing any of this stuff. And I think it's really important for me to not have any sort of ego about myself. So like, you know, there was a live stream, a friend of mine, and I sent a super chat through. They were like, Adam Comey, he's like a celebrity. And I was like, but I don't, I just see myself as Adam, and it's sometimes weird. But I'm always going to see myself as Adam, and I will always be accessible, and I think that's important to have.
Yeah, you seem like me. I mean, I get a little jazz sometimes when you get a little bit of attention.
Mhm.
Yeah, but mostly what makes me happy is if I work on a project and then, you can tell that people got a lot of use out of it. That makes me happy to know, I do this show and I get comments from people saying, thank you for doing this. I really like this and this. Like knowing that, you write a column, you work an article, you do a podcast, and that it helped other people. That's what makes me happy. That's
Yeah,
why I keep doing this, because it's like I'm providing value to others, and that's what makes it totally worthwhile to me. And I think that's true for a lot of people that are interested in communications and journalism. And it's why even as this thing seems to be falling over its side and flailing all over the place, there are always going to be some people who are still willing to do it, even if they make no money doing it at all, just because it provides good value. Hopefully we keep more of those people, not less, but we'll just have to see.
yeah, and actually, one thing I'll say is that's why with Wrong Speak, um, I'm having Wrong Speak work the way that it is working, and a lot of people are first-time journalists. Like quite literally, there's Alfred is one of our journalists. Alfred doesn't have any journalism background, but he's like, but I really want to do this. I was like, okay, let's give it a shot. And our editor is an experienced journalist, and there's a little bit of hand holding and guidance. But like, I think that's important, just giving people a chance. And if they're really passionate about it, Like they're not really that interested about the money. And I think there's a lot to that. So I've I've been utilizing Wrong Speak as an avenue for regular people who want an opportunity to be heard, whether it's an opinion. And I have journalists who want a chance to create a resume for themselves, to do some actual research in journalism, um, and to give them an opportunity and a platform to be seen, and search after stories that actually interest them, right? And because if it interests them, they'll do a really good job, and it might interest other people as well because the passion will come through. I think that's really important, and that's why I fund it. Wrong Speak. We don't as of right now, at least, we don't have any advertisers. We have no sponsors, and so pretty much all of it comes from my labor, and I'm okay with that. So I think it's very important to pay it forward because I was given opportunities, and I think it's really important to allow other people to give opportunities. And I try to foster that environment of humility amongst everybody and being accessible and being a mentor for people, because I was just in their shoes not that long ago.
Awesome. So I think we're going to wrap it up here. This was a pretty good conversation, Adam. I think if more people had that attitude about news, I think we would be in a better position.
Yeah.
You're right. Humility is important. Appreciating what you do is important. I think a big problem people have had with the mainstream media is they seem to take their audience for granted.
Yes.
And no one wants to feel that way. Like, you don't want to feel like, oh, they just expect I'm always going to be here. Like, no one likes it. No one likes it.
Yeah.
So we're going to tie it up here. Adam, where can people follow you? You have your awesome podcast, your columns. Where would you like people to check you out on social media? Any articles in particular, perhaps you want them to read?
I write a lot of stuff. So I'll say my Substack is kind of my hub for everything. So I'm putting links to my commentary, links to articles, to different publications like Human Events, the New York Post, especially, and Epic Times. I try to inform my Substack audience as to the different publications that I've written for, and to have them check it out. I have the Breaking Bread series where we have sit-down conversations, like actual conversations in good faith, while having a meal. And it's very laid back and relaxed and unscripted. I don't plan for any of it. And I'm putting a lot of effort into the quality of the imagery and everything as well. So all that stuff people can find on my Substack, adambcoleman.substack.com.
Yeah, it won't be hard to find Adam at all. He's doing pretty well. I'm excited to see where his career continues from here. I listened to your interview with David Marcus,
Yes.
who's another writer for the New York Post. Excellent guy. I really enjoyed that conversation. So check him out. Breaking Bread podcast. All his work on the Substack and more. And we're rolling up here, guys. This show isn't possible without the support of people like you. Thank you to our supporters. Thank you to Bain Books Publishing for their guide helping put together the show. Thank you to Young Voices, a journalism advocacy organization, also for helping putting things together. My editor, Chris Holowicki, he is awesome. He makes me look way more competent than I actually am. To him and all the rest of you, thank you so much. Until next time, my friends, keep geeking out.